Good morning. And yes, today is the last of the East Merced RCD's hosted RCPP workshop. And I think everyone received an agenda through the email, but we'll start with Trina, who will go over the RCD's involvement and who we are. Stacy and Paul with AFT will go over the background and the processes and practices of the RCPP, and Matt with the NRCS and Merced will go more into the application process. And there will be some room for questions in the end for anyone who does have those questions. We have some RCD representatives here, so we'll just briefly introduce ourselves. I'm Rainey, and I think Ursula's on here. We're with the East Merced RCD, and the RCD's here. You received also the 1200 form in the email. When we mention application throughout this presentation, that's what we mean when we say the April 1st deadline. So that 1200 form is sort of the foundation of this whole conversation. And the RCDs are sort of important in submitting that and connecting you to the NRCS offices in your region. So Amy, do you want to introduce yourself and your RCD?
Hi, everybody. This is Amy Solzanoff, and I'm with the Madera Chowchilla RCD. And Chris Johanan is our planner for the RCD as well. Nice to meet you all.
And I think Justin's still here. Oh, there you are.
Good morning. Thanks, Rainey. Happy to be here. My name is Justin Morgan. I work at the Sierra Resource Conservation District in Eastern Fresno County, and I'm the Agricultural Programs Manager, and so helping with this RCPP along with American Farmland Trust and the other RCDs. So I'm here. I'm going to drop my email in the chat if anybody wants to reach out to me about this program or just to get in touch about anything in Fresno County. And happy to be here. Thanks for the time.
Great. And I think this is a good segue into you, Trina.
Okay. And I'm Trina Walley. I'm with the East Stanislaus Resource Conservation District. And so in total with Rainey, Justin, Amy, and ourselves, there's 4 RCDs that are participating. My little shortcut button's not, there we go. That are participating in this project. And so if you are not familiar with what your local RCD is, we are your conservation partners. So we are a special district that is in place to help facilitate our farmers and ranchers and connecting them with state and federal and other funding sources. So there are 4 of us RCDs on the call, and that will be assisting with this project. But just a couple of highlights: your RCDs are involved in community programs. So we've got community gardens, river education days, volunteer plantings for monarch habitat, riparian restoration, those types of educational outreach opportunities. But we also have a lot, because of where we're at in the Central Valley, we have a lot of programs that focus on the agricultural side. I've got forestry in the wrong section there, but forestry for fire safe and fuel reduction, carbon farm planning, pollinator habitat such as cover crops and hedgerows, a lot of irrigation programs, irrigation evaluations and workshops. We're working on an equipment rental program, as we hear from farmers that is one of our barriers to implementing some of these conservation practices. And then ultimately that kind of winds into the conservation planning. So a lot of this got started way back with a soil health stakeholder group that was brought together for the Northern Central Valley. And since then, our various RCDs have slowly but surely been working together to bring more programs to our Central Valley region. Several of us have irrigation related programs that we can go out and do the irrigation evaluations, calculate distribution uniformity, and help with irrigation water management. We also hold a lot of outreach and education, whether it's out on rangeland, about the practices that can be done there, or if it's on the cover crops, which is what that bottom picture is. And a lot of these programs came because RCDs received funding for drought resiliency and with a focus on the soil health. A lot of that led to some field trials, a lot of funding related to carbon sequestration and reduction of greenhouse gas. And so we apply to all those types of funding so that we can bring more research, implementation, and technical assistance to our farmers and ranchers. And we can do that all through conservation planning. And so we do those with partners. A lot of them require some sort of plan to apply to their funding. So that's whether that's CDFA SWEEP for the water efficiency, CDFA Healthy Soils. The Almond Board of California has a sustainability program that requires irrigation evaluations. Several programs, the Department of Water Conservation, Water Resources, and Department of Conservation. So all of those things require some sort of record keeping or conservation planning that we can help provide the technical assistance for. But there's a lot of reasons that farmers come to us. A lot of them want to seek sustainability for their next generation and make sure their farms can be passed on to the next generation. A lot of them come to us because they need some sort of market access, whether it's a processor requirement, a buyer's program, or a certification. I'm seeing that a lot on the rangelands. Also, future market access. There's a lot of movement happening in the ecosystem marketplace and carbon exchange that there would be potential future funding for farms and ranches related to that. And then, of course, I think NRCS is very familiar with the fact that people come to them when they're looking for funding their farm improvements, whether that's infrastructure with their irrigation systems or just anything that can help increase their yields to help their bottom line. So we'll be focusing in on our partnership with the Natural Resource Conservation Service in today's call. They have various programs. If you've worked with them, you're probably familiar with the EQIP program. They also have their Conservation Stewardship Program, their newer Conservation Incentive Program, and then what we'll be talking about today, the RCPP or Regional Conservation Partnership Program that is just for our specific region. So with that, I will turn it over to the next speaker who will actually go into what exactly RCPP is and how it can assist you.
Great. All right. I think that's my segue. Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Schutz. I am the California Climate and Agriculture Program Manager for American Farmland Trust. And I'll be speaking today with Paul Bahm. Paul, go ahead and introduce yourself if you'd like.
Yes, I'm Paul Lum, the California Agricultural Specialist with American Farmland Trust. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, we are working together in this collaborative with the RCDs and with NRCS on this regional conservation partnership program. And we'll just give a little bit of background of where this stemmed from as well, and then jump into the application process and what practices are applicable. So American Farmland Trust published a paper with Conservation Biology Institute's support on the research end about the land and water issues in the valley relating to population growth and groundwater depletion and water resources in general. And that created this strategy that American Farmland Trust wanted to address three key priorities in the valley to help with these issues. And so those priorities were related to protecting some of the most important farmland that is in the valley, that coincides with some of the areas that are going to be the most populated and most developed over the coming years, supporting socially disadvantaged farmers in the valley, and scaling up regenerative ag, or other terms for that, like good conservation practices and stewardship on the land. So the goals of that strategy and of this collaborative are to, again, support best management practices, look at land protection options through tools called conservation easements, agricultural conservation easements, and another tool called land repurposing, where we can actually, we have some financial assistance to rent land. And we'll get into that, just touch on that briefly later. Most of what we're talking about today and what folks are seeing in terms of these applications and this April 1st deadline are related to the best management practices, which are related to the conservation practices that can be funded through this program. So, and then we'll also be looking throughout the next 5 years at expanding technical assistance, the capacity of technical assistance providers, and then reaching new and underserved farming communities. So this is the collaborative. These are partners that are funded through this RCPP currently, and the hope is that this collaborative will extend beyond this current funding source. But right now we are working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is providing the financial assistance to producers for these practices that we'll go into. And this program currently extends throughout 5 counties. So from north to south, we have Stanislaus. And so your local RCD there working on the project is East Stanislaus RCD. Merced, working with East Merced RCD. Madera, working with Madera Chowchilla RCD. Fresno with Sierra RCD. And then we're also working in Tulare County. And currently American Farmland Trust is focusing efforts in Tulare County. So if you're a producer in Tulare, you can reach out to AFT, and otherwise reach out to your local RCD in these counties as well. And we'll touch on these other partners. These last 3 here are 2 technology partners, the Freshwater Trust, and I've mentioned before, Conservation Biology Institute. They're helping with the research and the back end for us as technical assistance providers to better identify the parcels where we're working and some of the priority areas. And then California Farmland Trust is another land trust alongside American Farmland Trust, and they'll help with some of the other priorities further down the line in this project. So getting to the nuts and bolts, the RCPP process to apply for funding is this April 1st deadline, so coming up very soon. And this is the general process that'll take place. Your initiative as a producer to contact your local RCD or AFT to express your interest in the program and in working with us on some of these conservation practices is the first step. And then we can come out, one of these providers can come out and meet on your farm and discuss your resource concerns and the conservation practices that may help you on your farm. And then that application period, or that application would be due by April 1st. And we do understand too that this second part doesn't have to happen before this April 1st deadline. It's obviously preferred. The most important step for this April 1st deadline is getting that application in to your local RCD or NRCS office. But it is really great if you can touch base with your local RCD or AFT and set up this in-person meeting. And so this is the, again, application deadline April 1st, and just a general sense of what happens after that. There's a series of internal deadlines for ranking applications and identifying who's awarded funding. And then the obligation period is in September, and that's when it'll be more clear if you've received funding and if you can go forward with the practices. So those are kind of the 2 main deadlines as a producer that may be important to you. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the application and the conservation practices, and Paul Lum's going to go into more of the practice piece. The general idea of what these practices are for and what meeting on your farm and talking about your resources concerns are for is to develop a conservation plan, a farm conservation plan. This doesn't have to happen before April 1st, but this is just to give you a sense of the purpose of meeting with you and the purpose of identifying resource concerns and practices that may help your objectives and goals on the farm. So that'll come, certainly along in the process. The conservation plan does not have to happen though before April 1st. So I'm going to jump now into the conservation practices, and Paul Lum will go through, there's 15 practices that are part of this funding pool. So go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Stacy. Yes, I'm going to talk about the 15 conservation practices as part of the RCPP. The overall purpose is to reduce groundwater pumping, reduce reliance on groundwater pumping, improve soil health, improve ag land management, and increase water conservation. And so these pages, these slides, we've broken it up into 3 buckets. First, we're listing soil health practices that these all improve water holding capacity and increase infiltration rates. Conservation cover, the first bullet, generally refers to vegetating or planting a permanent or perennial, but permanent crop into bare soil or a non-farmed area. Then we have cover crops. Reduced tillage, that could refer to fewer tillage passes through a change in management or a change in equipment. It could refer to strip tilling, planting into a strip using a no-till drill and still doing some tillage. No-till, basically a change in management and equipment if needed to implement no-till. Soil carbon amendments generally refers to composted animal manure and composted dry, that's the key, using green waste as a compost. And biochar is certainly something that we encourage and are looking to expand. Irrigation water management is focusing on improving farm water use. And so an example could be upgrading or changing out sprinkler nozzles, installing soil moisture sensors, weather stations, tracking evapotranspiration rates, all focusing on improved water conservation. And thanks. Land use enhancement practices. So I consider this our second bucket. And so critical area planting refers to vegetating or planting an area that, for instance, might be bare or degraded it could be due to natural causes like fire or flood, or planting in areas that happen to be changed or bare or degraded through installing other conservation practices. Hedgerows, we found it's been pretty established the benefit of hedgerows, planting on either the edges of fields or the property or in between fields, improves biodiversity, insect habitat, and the key is basically reducing soil erosion and runoff, because there is the trees and shrubs that make up the hedgerows. So improving that biodiversity. Similar with wildlife habitat management, having a vegetated area, managing habitat and reducing the key there again, soil health, reducing runoff, erosion, keeping the rainwater and keeping that water in the soil. Then wildlife habitat planning is establishing the habitat. The water conveyance and groundwater recharge practices, these practices are a direct benefit to groundwater supplies. And so the focus on these 4 bullets is to improve groundwater supplies. So pumping plant, we can use that for conveying water from surface supplies to the farm, or improving the pumping efficiency, for instance, adding a variable frequency drive, upgrading a pump, upgrading a filtration system, all towards more efficient use. And structure for water control, That could be, for instance, a concrete or plastic structure to control flow and improve irrigation efficiency ultimately. The groundwater recharge basin or trench, that basically putting surface water on farm into a basin for groundwater storage. And on-farm recharge generally refers to storing water on the farm, perhaps a field or an orchard as pictured, and in the winter months when those crops are dormant. I believe that's a description of the 15 practices. What these practices, the RCPP, the practices are set apart from EQIP because our focus with using surface water and replacing groundwater pumping. And back to Stacy.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I was going to go back, but then I'm having trouble going back. So anyways, those are the 15 practices. So if any of those are of interest to folks on the call, reach out to your local RCD if you're in Stanislaus, Merced, Madera, Fresno, or Tulare counties, and get started on an application. These next two slides are just about upcoming opportunities. So these are not relevant to the April 1st deadline, but these, if you have interest, you can reach out. Funding will be available for these in the near future. So agricultural conservation easements, if you're a producer and want to protect your land and in exchange possibly receive funding for the development rights of your property. This is a really great opportunity for producers. And we'd be happy to talk about this more. And then another opportunity, sorry, here we go, is land rentals. And this is the idea of a transition in land use on your property. And there will be funding available in the near future for land rentals, temporary land rentals during the period of this award. So if this is something that you may be interested in, you can also reach out and we can give more information on when that may be expected to be up and running. But the main takeaways from this presentation are more related to those 15 practices that Paul just covered. And if you have interest in those, contact your local RCD or AFT as soon as possible and sign up with the application and get that into your RCD and NRCS offices as soon as possible. So thanks for your time, and we can take questions, at any point. And I think now we'll hear from Matt Bahm more about the NRCS process.
All right, thanks, Stacy. All right, is everybody seeing my screen there? Okay. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the application process. For those of you that have applied for EQIP or some other NRCS program in the past, this is going to be redundant, but for those of you that are new to the process, I'm going to talk about some things that we typically see with new applicants. Probably the biggest one that people don't realize, you can come in and get an application form from us anytime, but we can't process that application until you are registered with the Farm Services Agency. And so we do work very closely with our Farm Services Agency. So your local NRCS office can help direct you to who you need to talk to there. But before we can process an application, we have to show that you are registered with Farm Services Agency and you have land registered with Farm Services Agency. So you'll need to provide some evidence of land control. You don't have to own the land, but you have to be listed as an operator. So you have to have, excuse me, a deed, a lease, or some sort of rental agreement in place. They'll, excuse me, they will also establish who has the ability to sign any of the documents that we would need. And so oftentimes this will be, a couple, so husband, wife, having your spouse registered, that kind of things. That way we know who can come in and is able to sign. And again, we can kind of help you with these as you go. A new form, some of you that maybe have applied in the past, but haven't in the last couple of years. This is a farm operating plan. And, it sounds really complex with farm operating plan, but really this is just a form that shows all the lands associated with you. And so you would want to make sure that's registered. That way FSA has on record any lands that you're either the owner or operator of. And then adjusted gross income certification. And so you need to have this on file for specific to the RCPP. You do not have to be eligible. There's a waiver for this, but typically for NRCS, it's going to be under 900,000 for the adjusted gross income annually. Again, the RCPP has a waiver for this. And then you also want to make sure that you have any highly erodible lands and wetland determinations completed prior to getting going. So this is probably one of the ones that can hold things up. So make sure to get into your FSA office and get these things registered, because that 1026 form, if you haven't had a determination done, that can slow the process a bit. So you want to make sure. And then once you're registered with FSA, then you're ready to apply for NRCS programs. And I like to go over this because a lot of folks don't realize the extra step involved there. Rainey sent out the 1200 form is what we call it. It's our application form. It is a 3-page application that starts our process. And so this is kind of step one on paperwork to get you in our system. And so it does need to be filled out and signed by whoever is listed as the decision maker. And so that goes back to that FSA slide. It's who has that signature authority on there. If there are multiple people with that, it can file under any of them, as long as you have that signatory verification with FSA. And if you have any question on that, your NRCS office can definitely help you with those questions. Sorry for the phone ringing. The application is pretty straightforward. It's general information, your name, address, general contact information, program interest. So specific to this, there is a checkbox that you can check RCPP. And so that's easy. If you have any questions, again, RCD staff, NRCS staff can help you with these. Then we want to know, what is your business structure? If you're an individual farmer, it's just you and your spouse, nice, straightforward. Or if you're an entity. And so if you're an entity, we need to make sure that, again, you're registered with FSA, but then any of those partners that are under that, because that gets to be important, not as much under RCPP, but under EQIP, because we look at how much there's a farm bill cap on how much you can use. And so that will depend on the individual members of your entity. Then listing if you're historically underserved. And so in the instruction sheet with the 1200, which you should get, if you don't, please reach out to your RCD or your NRCS office, but it has definitions of all of these different categories that we do and that we have. And you want to make sure to check those if any or all apply. Your land information. So one of the big misconceptions I hear a lot with folks, if they're leasing like public land, is that NRCS can't work on public lands. And that's actually not true. So as long as you have, again, show that control of that land, there are some extra forms you have to sign if you want to install a practice. So if you install a vegetative or structural practice, you will have to get proof. Essentially, whoever controls your lease, you'll have to get them to sign to say that it is okay. We can't install a fence on a piece of property, on a piece of public land, if we don't get approval from the land manager. But we do install practices on public land. We can do that. Same with private lands and trusts. And then just general crop information. So really, this is very general. It's going to be, what type of crop do you have? And then, do you have livestock? If so, what are the general numbers? So pretty straightforward. Should be all things that you can answer pretty readily. If there's any questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out to your RCD, to your NRCS office. Depending on what type of project you're applying for, Paul mentioned the irrigation water management. For that one, there are a couple other forms. We want to see an irrigation history, just so we kind of know what you've been doing over the last several years on that property. Some of these will require cost estimates, but that's not really something you need to worry about upfront. You don't need to have those in place to turn in an application. Those would be something that your RCD or your NRCS staff can work with you on any of those required documents. And Rainey wanted me to touch on real quick, just kind of the RCP versus EQIP. And so for the producer, there's not really a difference. These are EQIP practices that are under RCPP. Like Paul and Stacy mentioned, it's just a limited suite. So there are 15 practices specific to this RCPP. Those all can be found under EQIP, but these are specific to this program. So you can't apply for something outside of that under this program. You can apply for EQIP and RCPP simultaneously. So working with your RCD and NRCS staff, if you have something, a practice that that you would like to install and that is kind of identified as a resource concern but isn't under the RCPP, you could submit an application for EQIP as well. So those can happen simultaneously, just so people are aware. And really, that's just a matter of letting your NRCS staff and your RCD staff know that you're interested in both programs. So if you have practices, again, that are outside the RCPP, but are a resource concern on your property, just let that RCD or NRCS staff person know, and they'll help you kind of determine what the best fit is for your specific situation. So that's what we're here for. But again, if you have any questions on application, should be pretty straightforward, but again, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us with that. So your local NRCS office is happy to help with those. We do it all the time. So that's what I have, Rainey. So short and sweet.
Great, thank you everyone for speaking on the RCPP.